I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine waking up in a wooden lodge, deep in the forest, beside a quiet lake. The morning birds are singing, the air smells like pine trees and river water. It is peaceful, beautiful even. Now imagine reaching for your phone, and it's gone. Reaching for your wallet, and it's gone too. You call out the names of your children. No answer. You walk to the door and open it. The parking spot where your son's truck was parked, empty. You walk to the other room where your daughter and her husband were sleeping, empty. You check every corner of that small lodge, your voice getting louder, your heart getting heavier. Empty, empty, empty. They were gone. My own children had left me behind. I was 67 years old, alone in the middle of nowhere, with no phone, no money, no car, and no explanation. But that is not the part of this story that breaks my heart the most. The part that broke my heart came later, when they saw my face on the national news, and when they finally understood what kind of man they had left behind in those woods. Stay with me, because this story, my story, is one I have never told anyone before, not completely. Not like this. My name is Harold James Whitfield. I am not a complicated man, never was. I grew up in a small town in rural Tennessee, the son of a tobacco farmer and a school teacher. We did not have much money. Some winters were harder than others. But my mother always said, Harold, a man's worth is not measured in dollars. It is measured in the way he treats people when nobody is watching. I carried those words my whole life. I worked hard. I spent 32 years as a maintenance supervisor at a paper mill. Not a glamorous job. Not the kind of job people write stories about. But it was honest work, and I was proud of it. I fixed things. I kept machines running. I made sure other people could do their jobs. And when I came home at night, even on the hard nights, even when my back was aching and my hands were stiff, I came home to the thing that mattered most to me. My family, my wife Ellen, was the most patient woman God ever put on this earth. She had brown eyes that could calm a storm, and a laugh that filled whatever room she was in. We met when we were 19 years old at a church picnic, of all places. She reached for the same piece of cornbread as I did, and I let her have it. She said, "That was very gentlemanly of you." I said, "Ma'am, I wasn't being gentlemanly. I just figured anybody who wanted cornbread that badly deserved it more than me." She laughed. Lord, she laughed. We were married 11 months later, and for 41 years she was my partner, my best friend, my home. We had 2 children together. Our son, Daniel, he was 38 now, smart boy, always had been. Got a business degree, moved to Atlanta, built himself a good career in real estate. He married a woman named Stephanie, a sharp woman, very organized, very focused on appearances. Nice enough, I suppose. She came from a family with more money than ours, and she never quite let you forget it. Not with words exactly, just with a certain look she had, a way of glancing around the room when she came to visit, like she was calculating everything. Our daughter, Rachel, 35. She was softer than Daniel, more like her mother. She worked as a nurse, married a man named Greg, a quiet fellow who drove a delivery truck. Greg was good people, simple, like me. He and I always got along fine. For most of my life, I thought we were a good family. I really did. But families, like old houses, sometimes have cracks in the walls that you don't see until the storm comes. 18 months before that fishing trip, Ellen passed away. Pancreatic cancer. They found it in February. She was gone by June. 4 months. That's all we had after the diagnosis. 4 months to say everything you always meant to say. 4 months to hold someone's hand and pretend you are not terrified. 4 months to watch the strongest person you ever knew become smaller and smaller, until one morning she squeezed your hand one last time, and then she didn't. I do not have words for what that does to a man. I kept the house, our house, the same house we had lived in for 30 years. I kept her garden, even though I didn't really know how to take care of it. I kept her coffee mug on the counter. I kept the radio station she liked playing on Sunday mornings. Some people thought that was strange. Daniel especially thought I needed to move on. Dad, he said to me about 2 months after the funeral, "You can't keep living like she's still there." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Son, she is still there. She's in every inch of that house, and I'm not ready to let go of that." He didn't argue, but I could see it in his face, that quiet impatience, that subtle frustration that his father was not behaving the way he thought a man should behave. The months after Ellen passed were the loneliest of my life. I am not ashamed to say that. I was a man used to having a partner, used to sharing every day with someone, and suddenly I was just alone. I tried not to burden the children. I called once a week. I visited when I was invited. I did not complain. But I was drowning, quietly, politely, the way I had always done everything. It was Daniel who suggested the trip. He called me on a Tuesday evening in September, and the moment I heard his voice, I felt something lift in my chest. Because Daniel didn't call often, not just to talk. Usually there was a reason, a question about the will, or asking whether I'd thought about selling the house. But this time he said, "Dad, we want to take you on a fishing trip. Rachel and Greg are in, Stephanie and I are in. 4 days up at Cedar Lake Lodge, just family. What do you say?" I said yes before he even finished the sentence. You have to understand, I had been praying for something like this. I had been hoping, in the quiet of that empty house, that my children had not forgotten me, that we could still be a family, even without Ellen holding us all together. This felt like an answer. I could not sleep the night before we left. I got up at 4 in the morning and made coffee and sat on the back porch and talked to Ellen the way I did sometimes, just quietly, in my heart, and I told her that things were going to be all right, that our children were taking their old father on a fishing trip, that maybe we were going to be okay. I packed my old fishing gear, the same rod I'd had for 20 years, my worn canvas jacket, my waterproof boots. Ellen had given me a little folding knife one Christmas that I always kept with me on outdoor trips, and I packed that too. I was ready. We drove up on a Thursday morning. Daniel and Stephanie in their silver SUV, Rachel and Greg in their car, me following behind in my old pickup truck. It was about a 3-hour drive into the mountains, up winding roads lined with oak and pine, until we reached Cedar Lake Lodge, a cluster of wooden cabins tucked beside a wide, glassy lake that reflected the mountains like a mirror. It was beautiful. Ellen would have loved this, I said quietly when we got out of the trucks. Nobody responded to that. I didn't mind. I was used to it. Those first 2 days were good. Not perfect, but good. We fished in the mornings. I caught 3 bass on the first day, more than anyone else, and Greg gave me a high five and said, "Harold, you still got it." I laughed. It felt good to laugh. In the evenings we grilled on the porch and ate together and played cards. Rachel told stories about her patients, the funny ones, the ones that made you realize how strange and beautiful people are. Greg talked about a hiking trail he'd heard about nearby. Even Daniel seemed relaxed, leaning back in his chair with a beer, more like the boy I remembered than the businessman he had become. Stephanie, polite but distant. She spent a lot of time on her phone. She wrinkled her nose a little at the food I cooked one evening. I'd made cornbread and a simple fish stew, the way my mother taught me. "It's very rustic," she said, in a voice that made rustic sound like an insult. I said nothing. I just kept serving. The second night, I overheard something I wasn't meant to hear. I had gone to bed early, around 9. My old bones appreciated an early bedtime, but I couldn't sleep right away. My room was at the back of the lodge, and the voices from the common room carried through the thin wooden walls. I heard Stephanie's voice first, low but sharp. How much longer are we supposed to do this? Daniel's voice. Keep it down. I'm just saying. This was supposed to be a relaxing vacation, and instead we're babysitting your father. I stopped breathing. He's not that bad, Rachel said, and God bless her for it. Rachel, he cried at dinner last night, over cornbread, because apparently your mother used to make it. It's been a year and a half. He needs to see someone, a therapist, something. It's not normal. He's grieving, Rachel said quietly. He's moping, and it's exhausting. Daniel, I'm serious. Something needs to change. He can't keep calling every week and expecting us to drop everything. I know. Let's just get through the trip. Silence. Then Daniel again, quieter. We'll talk about the house situation when we get back. Okay. There are some things we need to sort out. I lay in that dark room and I stared at the ceiling. I did not cry, not then. I just lay there, very still, the way I used to lie still as a boy during thunderstorms, waiting for it to pass. Get through the trip, he had said. Not enjoy the trip, not spend time with Dad, just get through it. I had been a task, a thing to be managed, but I said nothing. I got up the next morning at 5:30, made coffee for everyone, and smiled when they came to the table. That was the kind of man I was. The third morning was a Saturday. I was up before sunrise as usual. I stood on the dock for a while, watching the mist come off the lake. It was the kind of morning that makes you feel like the world is wholly everything silver and still. Mountains dark against a pale sky, a loon calling somewhere across the water. I had my rod in my hand, but I wasn't really fishing. I was just standing there, missing Ellen, thinking about my life, wondering what came next. When I came back inside around 7, the others were stirring. Daniel was making coffee. Stephanie was at the table scrolling her phone. Rachel came out of her room, looking tired. Morning, Dad, Rachel said, kissing my cheek. Morning, sweetheart. Daniel turned from the coffee maker and gave me a look, that careful, practiced look he developed. The one that felt kind on the surface but was really just, managed. Hey Dad, listen, he said, you look tired. Why don't you stay here and rest today? We were thinking of driving into town, checking out some of the shops, grabbing a proper lunch somewhere. It might be a lot of walking. I looked at him. I'm fine, I said. I'd like to come, Dad. He said my title the way you say it to a child, patient, firm. You've been up since before dawn every single morning. You need to rest. We'll be back by 4:30 at the latest. Okay. Stephanie didn't look up from her phone. Greg started to say something. I don't mind if Harold comes along. But Rachel touched his arm and he went quiet. We'll bring you back something from town, Rachel said, and she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I looked around the table, at my son, at my daughter, at the people who were supposed to be my family, and I made a decision. I did not argue. I did not plead. All right, I said. You all go on. I'll rest. Daniel looked relieved. The tension went out of his shoulders. They left 45 minutes later. I stood on the porch and watched Daniel's SUV pull out, then Rachel's car behind it. I raised my hand. Nobody waved back. They were already talking, already moving on to the next thing. I went back inside, sat down in the old wooden chair by the window. I told myself it was fine, that they'd be back. I waited. I fell asleep in that chair. When I woke up, the light had changed. The golden afternoon light that meant it was past 4 o'clock. I blinked and looked around, expecting to hear the sound of their voices, their car doors, their footsteps on the porch. Nothing. I checked the clock on the wall. 5:15. Late, I thought. Traffic, maybe. Or they found something interesting in town. I heated up some leftover fish stew and ate alone. 6 o'clock. Nothing. I went to Daniel's room. His bag was gone. Stephanie's suitcase gone. The charger she always left plugged in by the bed gone. I walked to Rachel and Greg's room. Their bags were gone too. I went back to my room and reached for my phone on the nightstand. Gone. I checked my jacket pocket. Where I kept my wallet. Gone. I stood in the middle of that empty lodge with the last of the daylight coming through the windows. and I understood. They weren't coming back. Now, here is where I need to pause because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I must have been devastated, collapsed, broken, and yes, there was a moment, just a moment, where something in my chest simply cracked like ice giving way. But then something else happened. Something I did not expect. I got calm. Not the calm of a man who doesn't feel pain. The calm of a man who has lived long enough to understand that falling apart will not help him survive the night. I was 67 years old. I was alone in a mountain lodge with no phone, no car, and no money. The nearest town was 12 miles away. So I did what my father taught me to do when things got hard. I thought clearly, and then I moved. I need to stop here and tell you something. Something that my children did not know. Something that almost nobody knew because I am not a man who talks about himself. Never have been. Ellen knew, God knew, and a few very quiet people in very quiet offices knew. But my children did not know. They did not know about the letters I had been receiving for the past year. You see, 31 years ago, when I was working at the paper mill, I noticed something. The way the waste materials were being handled, it wasn't right. Chemicals were being disposed of in ways that I was pretty sure were illegal. I didn't have a degree. I wasn't a scientist. But I was a man who paid attention, and what I saw scared me. I went to my supervisor. He told me to mind my business. I went to the plant manager. I was told my job was to fix machines, not ask questions. So I did something that took me 3 months and every bit of courage I had. I documented everything quietly, carefully, in the little notebook I kept in my chest pocket, and I contacted the Environmental Protection Agency. What followed was a long, slow, invisible process. The kind of thing that happens in conference rooms and courtrooms and government offices, none of which had anything to do with my daily life at the mill. I was asked to testify. I did. I was asked to provide records. I did. I was warned implicitly that this could cause problems for me. I lost my job 8 months later. Restructuring, they called it. I found another job. Life went on. But the case, it kept going. Slowly, the way these things do. And over the years, it grew into something much larger than one man's complaint about one paper mill. It became part of a wider federal investigation into industrial waste disposal across 6 states, 11 companies, decades of violations. I had not thought about it much recently. Ellen's illness had consumed everything, but 3 months before the fishing trip, I had received a certified letter. A law firm representing the federal government. The case had been settled, and because I was an original whistleblower, one of the key early witnesses, I was entitled to a portion of the settlement. Not a small portion. The letter said $4.3 million. I had told nobody, not because I was hiding it, but because I was still processing it, because it felt unreal, because Ellen wasn't there to tell first, and telling anyone else felt wrong without telling her first. I had an appointment with the attorney the week after the fishing trip. I had been planning to tell the children at dinner, a nice dinner, back home after everything was signed and official, but now I was standing alone in an empty lodge in the mountains, and none of that mattered. What mattered was surviving the night. I found what I needed in the lodge's small utility closet. A half-full box of crackers, a bottle of water, a flashlight with batteries that still had some life in them, and my own folding knife, Ellen's Christmas gift, still in my jacket pocket. They had not thought to take that. I wrote a note and left it on the table, not for my children, but for the lodge owner, explaining what had happened and asking them to call someone for me if they came by. Then I started walking, 12 miles, downhill, mostly, on a gravel forest road, in my waterproof boots and my old canvas jacket, with a flashlight and some crackers and the kind of stubbornness that only comes from decades of hard living. I will not pretend it was easy. The first 3 miles were in daylight. The next 3 were in the gray dusk. The last 6 were in full darkness, with the flashlight cutting a small yellow path through the black trees, and the sounds of the forest all around me, owls, wind, the occasional crack of something moving in the brush. I thought about Ellen. While I walked, I talked to her quietly the way I did. You'd think this was ridiculous, I said. An old man walking 12 miles in the dark because his children left him in the mountains. I could almost hear her laugh, that clear, bright laugh. You always did love a long walk, she would have said. I smiled in the dark, kept walking. Around midnight, I reached the edge of a small town. In Millhaven, the sign said, population 200. Gas station on the corner, still lit up. I walked in, probably looking like something the forest had tried to swallow and spit back out. Muddy boots. 12 miles of sweat and night air on me, and the young woman behind the counter looked up with wide eyes. Sir, are you all right? I've been better, I told her honestly. I wonder if I could use your phone. The person I called was Thomas. Thomas Beaumont had been my best friend since we were 11 years old. He lived 40 miles from Millhaven, and when I told him where I was and what had happened, he said 4 words before he hung up. I'm on my way. He arrived in just under an hour. He pulled up in his old Ford pickup, took one look at me standing outside that gas station, and his face did something complicated, something that was half relief and half fury. He drove me home, 4 hours, in the middle of the night. He didn't say much at first. Thomas never talked when he was angry. He needed to let it settle. About an hour into the drive, he said, "Did they take your phone on purpose?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe they thought they were doing me a favor, keeping me from calling and worrying." I paused. Or maybe they just didn't think about me at all. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Harold, I know. You have to tell them about the settlement. I know." "Thomas? Because right now, they think you're just their old, sad father who needs to be managed. They don't know who you are." I looked out the window at the dark road rushing past. "The money doesn't change who I am," I said. "No," Thomas agreed, "but it might change how they see themselves." Now here is what my children were doing while I was walking 12 miles through the dark. I learned this later, piece by piece. They had driven back to Atlanta, all of them, together. Daniel had convinced them. I found this out from Greg, who felt terrible about it, that I had agreed to get a ride back with the lodge owner, who was driving through our town the next day. He had constructed a small, plausible lie, and in their relief at being free of the obligation of me, the others had accepted it without many questions. They did not call to check on me, not that night, not the next morning. It was Rachel who first felt something was wrong. She called the lodge on Sunday afternoon, 2 days after they'd left, and spoke to the owner's wife, who told her that my note had been found and that the lodge had been empty when they checked on it. "Your father left a note," the woman said. "He said he was going to walk out." Rachel, I was told, went completely pale. She called Daniel. Daniel called the lodge himself. Then, not knowing what to do, unsure whether to call the police, which would require explaining what they had done, they did nothing for another several hours and hoped for the best. Meanwhile, and here is where the national news comes in, Thomas had been telling the story, not maliciously. Thomas was not a malicious man, but Thomas had a large family and a big voice and a powerful sense of outrage. He had told his daughter, who had told her husband, who happened to be a regional journalist, and the journalist had done some checking. And he had found the story of an elderly man, a widower, abandoned by his children in the mountains, who walked 12 miles alone in the dark to survive. And because the journalist had done more checking, because these things have a way of unraveling, he had also found the public records of the federal whistleblower case, and the settlement. The story ran on Sunday evening, not just local news, national news. Elderly whistleblower, abandoned by family during mountain trip, walks to safety weeks before receiving mulct. $1 million settlement. I was sitting in my living room Sunday evening in Ellen's old armchair, drinking chamomile tea, when my phone rang. It was Rachel. She was crying before she even spoke. "Dad. Dad, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I should have. Daniel said you had a ride, and I should have checked. I should have called. Rachel. I saw the news, Dad. I saw it. Are you okay? Are you home? I'm coming right now. I'll drive through the night. Rachel." "Stop." I said it gently. "I'm home. I'm safe." You don't need to drive tonight. Dad, I'm so sorry. Her voice broke completely. I'm so sorry. I sat with that for a moment. I know you are, sweetheart. I said. Daniel called 3 minutes later. His call was different. Dad, I don't know what to say. His voice was stiff with shame, the way it gets when a proud man has been caught. I waited. I made a mistake. A serious mistake. And I want you to know that I never meant for it to go that far. I thought you'd be comfortable at the lodge, that the owner would check on you. Daniel, I said quietly, you took my phone and my wallet. Silence. Who else knew? I asked. More silence. Then, Stephanie thought it was better to. She was worried you'd call and make things difficult. I see. Dad, did you think about what it would be like for me when I woke up alone? Did that thought cross your mind at all? The silence this time was the kind that answers everything. I need some time, Daniel. I said, we'll talk. But not tonight. I hung up, sat for a long while in the quiet house. I looked at the empty chair across from me, Ellen's chair, where she used to sit in the evenings, and I spoke to her one more time. Well, I said softly, you always told me the truth would take care of itself. They all came the following Saturday. Daniel and Stephanie, Rachel and Greg, all 4 of them at my kitchen table, like the family meetings we used to have when the children were young, and something had gone wrong at school. Except this time, the thing that had gone wrong was something much larger than a bad grade or a broken window. I had made coffee. I had put out some cornbread, the same simple recipe that Stephanie had once called rustic. I sat at the head of the table. Thomas sat beside me. He was the only other person I had invited because I wanted a witness. I wanted someone who knew me, who had always known me, to be there. They came in looking ashamed. Even Stephanie, who never showed much of anything, looked like she hadn't slept well in days. We sat, poured coffee, and then I spoke first. I'm not going to yell, I said. I'm too old for yelling. And I think you've all yelled at yourselves enough this week. So I just want to talk. Is that all right with everyone? Nods. I heard you that second night. I said, through the wall, when Stephanie said I was exhausting. When Daniel said we'd get through the trip. I want you to know that. Rachel closed her eyes. Greg stared at the table. Daniel started to speak. I held up my hand. I'm not done. I took a slow breath. I have missed your mother every single day since she left us. Every morning I wake up, and the other side of the bed is empty. Every evening I eat dinner alone. Every Sunday I hear that radio station she liked by myself. I have been grieving, and yes, it has been hard. But I have never once asked you to carry that grief for me. I just wanted to share your company sometimes. That's all. Rachel was crying. Greg handed her a napkin. I am your father. I continued. I worked 32 years so that you could have what you needed. I was at every school play, and every graduation, and every Christmas, and every hard moment you ever had. I held your mother's hand while she was dying, and I held mine too, because I didn't want to fall apart in front of you. And when you took me on that fishing trip, I genuinely believed you were doing it out of love. I went to sleep feeling grateful, feeling hopeful. I paused, then I woke up alone. The kitchen was very quiet. Daniel, why did you take my wallet? He couldn't look at me. Stephanie thought, if you had money, you might try to follow us. Or cause a scene. Cause a scene. I repeated those words slowly. I have never caused a scene in my life. Stephanie, to her credit, did not argue. She just sat with her eyes down and her hands wrapped around her mug. Stephanie, I said. She looked up. I never disliked you. I said, I know you found me difficult. I know I was not the kind of father-in-law that fit into the life you imagined. But I want you to know, I never thought badly of you. I still don't. She blinked. I think that surprised her. I just wish, I said quietly, that you had extended me the same consideration. A tear ran down her face, first one I had ever seen from her. Thomas beside me was stone-faced and still, the way he got when he was moved. but refused to show it. Then I said the last thing. I have an appointment on Tuesday with a federal attorney. There's a settlement, a whistleblowing case I was part of years ago. It's been finalized, $4.3 million. The air in the room changed. I was going to tell you at a nice dinner. I had it planned out. I was going to take you all somewhere good and tell you, and then talk about how we could use some of it to help the family. Maybe help Rachel pay off her nursing school loans. Maybe help Greg fix up his work truck. Maybe set something aside for Daniel's business expansion he'd been talking about. I looked at each of them in turn, but I want you to understand something. The money was never what you should have valued about me. I was worth knowing before that money. I was worth treating with dignity before anyone knew that number. I stood up from the table. Now, I've said my piece. I'm going to offer you all more coffee and some cornbread, and I'm going to let you each decide, in your own hearts, what kind of people you want to be going forward, and what kind of family we're going to be. I turned and went to the counter. Behind me, I heard Daniel make a sound, a rough, choked sound, and when I glanced back, my son, my proud, business-suited Atlanta real estate son had his face in his hands and his shoulders were shaking. I set down the coffee pot. I walked to him. I put my hand on his shoulder the way I had when he was a small boy. I know, I said softly. I know, son. That was all. The months that followed were not easy. I won't tell you they were. Healing is never a simple, quick thing. Families are complicated. Trust once cracked takes time to repair, but repair, I believe, is possible, if both sides want it. Daniel came alone one evening about 3 weeks later. He sat in my living room, in the chair across from me, the chair that had been Ellen's, and he talked for a long time, about the pressure he felt, about the fear he'd had since his mother died, that he was becoming responsible for me and not knowing how to handle that, about the ways he had let Stephanie's anxiety become his own without questioning it. He did not make excuses, he just explained, and then he said, I am ashamed, Dad. I am truly ashamed, and I'm going to spend a long time making it right. If you'll let me, you're my son. I told him, you don't have to ask permission to be my son. Rachel called every day for 2 months, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to cry a little, sometimes just to talk about nothing in particular, recipes, her patients, a book she was reading, the kind of calls a daughter makes to a father when she remembers that time is not infinite. Greg fixed my fence without being asked. Stephanie, and this one surprised me most of all, sent me a handwritten letter, 3 pages, in her precise, careful handwriting. She apologized, not just for the lodge, but for the years of subtle dismissals, the looks, the carefully worded comments. She said that she had grown up in a family where weakness was hidden and emotions were a liability, and she had not known how to deal with grief or vulnerability in herself or anyone else. She said she was working on it. I wrote her back, 1 page. I told her I appreciated her honesty. I told her I hoped we could start fresh. We have been, slowly, doing exactly that. I am 68 years old now. I still live in the same house. Ellen's coffee mug is still on the counter. Her radio station still plays on Sunday mornings, but the house feels different now. Less like a museum of absence, more like a home again. Daniel and Stephanie come for dinner twice a month. Rachel and Greg come when they can. We fish sometimes in the creek near my house. Nothing as dramatic as mountain lodges. Thomas joins us when his knees permit. I have used some of the settlement money to pay off Rachel's loans and to set up a small scholarship fund at the local high school for kids from working families who want to study environmental science or engineering. Ellen would have liked that. The rest I am holding lightly. Money is a tool, nothing more. What I want to tell you, what I want you to carry with you when you close this video is this. The people who love you will not always show it perfectly, and you will not always show love perfectly. We are all fumbling in the dark sometimes, making decisions out of fear or exhaustion or selfishness, saying the wrong things, doing the wrong things, but there is a difference between a mistake and a pattern. There is a difference between a bad day and a bad heart, and the measure of a person, The real measure is not what they do when things are easy. It is what they do when they are caught, when the light comes on and everyone can see clearly, when the national news runs your story and there is nowhere left to hide. Do they double down? Do they explain it away? Or do they sit down at a kitchen table, accept a cup of coffee, and say, "I was wrong. I am sorry. Let me try to be better"? My children chose the latter. And because of that, I still have a family. I still sit at a table with my son and watch him laugh. I still hear my daughter's voice on the phone on Sunday mornings. I still tell stories about Ellen, and sometimes they ask to hear them. That is worth more than $4.3 million. That is worth more than anything. Before I go, I want to say one thing to whoever is watching this and seeing their own life in my story. If you are a child who has been dismissive of a parent who is getting older, who is lonelier than you realize, who is too proud to ask for what they need, please pick up the phone tonight, not tomorrow, tonight. You do not know what you are carrying until you sit with it, and you do not know what they are carrying until you ask. If you are a parent who has been left behind by family, by circumstance, by the cruelty of people who should have known better, hear me when I say this. Your worth is not determined by how they treated you. You are not a burden because someone called you one. You are not too old, too sad, too much. The fact that you kept going, kept loving, kept your dignity in the face of being discarded, that is not weakness, that is strength of the rarest kind. And if you are somewhere in the middle, part parent, part child, part person just trying to figure out what love is supposed to look like, then I hope this story reminds you of something simple. Treat people well while you have them, because the road is shorter than it looks, and the regret is longer than you can imagine. That is all I know. That is everything, really.